The Bank of Korea holds its key rate steady and scales back its expectations for growth and inflation. The race for the July 30th by-elections begins with 2 days of candidate registration starting today. And the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington and Beijing agree on the important urgency of swiftly curbing North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Hello and welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Korea's central bank held the key rate steady this month, but it did cut its growth outlook for this year, citing the negative impact that the April ferry disaster has had on the country's already sluggish domestic demand. Hwang Jie has the details.
The Bank of Korea expects the domestic economy to grow 3.8% this year, down 0.2 percentage points from its earlier forecast. It also cut its growth forecast for next year to 4% from 4.2%. Giving out a new growth outlook on Thursday, the central bank said the revision is due to sluggish domestic demand brought on by the ferry disaster in April. Although the new forecast indicates a slowdown in the pace of recovery, the bank said that it does not indicate a radical change in the bank's view that the overall domestic economy remains on a recovery track. But it did open up the possibility of a rate cut down the road.
This 3.8% growth is still matching up with the nation's potential growth rate. But the concern now is that there are bigger downside risks than upward potential.
The downside risk, the central bank says, is again coming largely from the ferry tragedy as well as the strengthening local currency trend.
We still can't rule out the possibility that the worsened economic sentiment due to the disaster will go on for a longer period of time.
The central bank has been under pressure for a rate cut as Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan urged the bank to seek easier monetary policies to spur growth. For this month, the central bank kept the key rate steady at 2.5% for the 14th straight month. While the central bank is taking a wait-and-see approach for the time being, some market analysts expect that a rate cut could come as early as next month. Hwang Jie, ARIRANG News.
China's trade performance last month missed the mark. Exports did rise by 7.2% on year, but fell well below market forecast of 10.4%. Imports were also up 5.5%, but also missed the mark expectations by 0.5 percentage points. Despite signs of slowing economic activity, officials in Beijing say they expect exports to pick up in the latter half of the year on improving global demand, but economists are less bullish. They say the recovery is likely to remain subdued unless stimulus measures are introduced to boost domestic demand. And over in the U.S., the Federal Reserve has set a tentative date for the end of its massive bond-buying stimulus program. The minutes of last month's policy meeting by the U.S. Federal Open Market Committee show that the Fed has plans to end its bond purchases by this October, citing improvements in the U.S. economy. Fed officials also discussed how and when to raise interest rates, but were divided on the issue of inflation, which is a primary indicator of economic recovery. And back here in Korea, with only 3 weeks left until crucial by-elections, the country's two main political parties are gearing up for a rematch after no clear winner emerged in last month's local elections. 15 parliamentary seats will be up for grabs. Kim Young-gil has more.
The race for the July 30th parliamentary by-elections got underway Thursday with 2 days of candidate registration at the National Election Commission. 15 assembly seats are up for grabs, the largest number in Korea's by-election history. Campaigning will officially start on July 17th and continue for 2 weeks until Election Day. For Korea's two main political parties, the by-elections will be far more than an opportunity to expand their presence in the National Assembly, as neither one emerged as a clear victor after local elections on June 4th. Currently, the ruling Saenuri Party holds 147 of the 300 parliamentary seats, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has 126. The ruling party is vying to gain a majority of the vacant assembly seats, while the main opposition party is looking to garner a win in important constituencies in Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province. Seoul's Dongjakbi district is considered strategically important to both parties, as the district's parliamentary seat is not only in the heart of Seoul, but is the former district of 7-term lawmaker and Saenuri heavyweight Chung Mong-jun. Experts say that as the 15 constituencies are spread around the nation, with 6 being in the metropolitan area, including 1 in Seoul, the mini general election could act as a referendum on the government. In appealing to voters, the Saenuri Party will emphasize the need for a national reform drive and supporting the president, while the Unified Opposition Party will continue to highlight government's mishandling of April's ferry tragedy. But unless the main opposition party can provide viable alternatives to the ruling party's policies, neither party will have a clear advantage. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Political gridlock in recent weeks has kept President Park Geun-hye's reform drive from gaining much traction. To grease the wheels, the president reached across the aisle this Thursday, meeting with the floor leadership of the ruling as well as opposition parties at the top office for the very first time. Chi Yoo-sun tells us more.
It was the first time President Park had invited the floor leadership from both the ruling and opposition parties to the presidential office. The president, who has been criticized for a lack of dialogue and cooperation with the opposition side, positively assessed the weekly meeting between the rival parties' floor leadership.
국민을 위한 상생에 국회로 이제 그 상을 잘 만들어가면 국민들께서도 크게 박수를 치시리라고 생각을 합니다.
A major development from Thursday's talks was an agreement to pass a bill designed to prevent a repeat of a tragedy like April's deadly ferry accident.
With an aim to pass the special legislation on the Seoul-ho ferry at the July 16th plenary session, the policy chiefs of the two parties will start negotiating the bill with the standing committees.
The rival parties need to narrow differences over the Seoul-ho Ferry Investigative Committee's authority and ways to compensate the victims and their families. President Park asked for bipartisan support behind her government and public sector reform-related bills put forth in the aftermath of the ferry disaster and a series of bills aimed at revitalizing the economy. A key part of the president's government restructuring plan involves setting up a safety ministry to oversee the management of all forms of natural and man-made disasters. The two parties in response said they'll seek to pass the bills next month. To the opposition's request that the president reconsider 2 controversial cabinet nominations, President Park said she would take it into consideration. The president asked the opposition to participate in her envisioned Inter-Korean Unification Preparatory Committee and said she hoped to meet both parties' floor leadership on a regular basis. Chi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to... 2 days of high-level talks between the United States and China have come to an end, with both sides agreeing that North Korea's nuclear weapons program must be stopped. But they saw less eye-to-eye on a cyber attack allegations that have put a sizable dent in their bilateral relations. Yoo Ri-an tells us more.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington and Beijing agree that curbing North Korea's nuclear weapons program is an urgent matter. In a press briefing after 2 days of talks Thursday, Kerry said both sides discussed specific ways to advance the goal of denuclearizing the North. Kerry and his Chinese counterparts also emphasized the importance of enforcing UN Security Council resolutions aimed at North Korea's weapons of mass destruction and its ballistic missile program. This, 1 day after North Korea fired 2 short-range missiles into the East Sea, demonstrating its capabilities. Kerry did, however, call on China to do more to rein in its neighboring ally and persuade them to give up their nuclear weapons. The U.S. indictment of 5 Chinese military officials for allegedly stealing trade secrets from American companies was also a topic of conversation. Kerry said that the loss of intellectual property through cyber hacking is having a chilling effect on U.S. innovation and investment, while Chinese Foreign Policy Chief Yang Jiechi described cybersecurity as a common threat facing all countries. Yang added that cyberspace should not be used as a tool for damaging the interests of other countries. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
North Korea has proposed working-level talks with South Korea to discuss its plans to send athletes and a cheering squad to the Incheon Asian Games this fall. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday that they would like to hold the talks in the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom next Tuesday. North Korea said earlier this week that it's sending a cheering squad to the upcoming Asian Games to be held in South Korea in an effort to improve inter-Korean relations. If a North Korean cheering squad were to participate in the Incheon Asian Games, it would be a first in 9 years. But North Korea might want to think again when it comes to test firing any more ballistic missiles in the coming years. The U.S. Navy says its latest defense system could knock them out of the sky in the blink of an eye. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The U.S. Navy has unveiled the latest and state-of-the-art missile defense, called a railgun. This long-range weapon can fire projectiles using electricity generated from the ship instead of gunpowder. The $250 million project is expected to change modern American warfare. The projectile itself weighs over 10 kilograms and can travel at 7 times the speed of sound. And is powerful as well. Navy officials say the impact is equivalent to a freight train smashing into a building at 160 kilometers an hour.
It can shoot down ballistic missiles. It can shoot down very advanced cruise missiles. It can shoot down fast-moving aircraft. It's extremely safe, and it's extremely effective.
Electromagnetic force accelerates the missile to Mach 7.5 and has a range of 185 kilometers. The beauty is not only the precision, but the cost. The projectiles only cost $25,000, a fraction of the price of a traditional missile.
At the end of the day, they can throw anything in the sky at us, and we'll be able to knock it out of the sky.
The railgun will undergo further testing through 2016 before it becomes fully operational in 2018. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
It's no coincidence that Korea has some of the fastest internet and wireless network speeds in the world. Fierce competition in the telecom industry to meet the high demands of Korean consumers has given rise to the rapid pace of development. And as our Connie Kim reports, this is just the beginning.
Using the world's fastest wireless network, Bang Mi-sun can download an hour-long online course on her smartphone in about 30 seconds.
Using the mobile IPTV, I stream movies and take online courses while I'm on public transportation. It's very convenient. I can download the videos quickly and watch them in high definition without ever getting disconnected.
Necessity may be the mother of invention, but competition doesn't hurt either. A fierce battle for network speed in Korea's telecom industry gave birth to the broadband LTE Advanced Network.
We found our customers wanting to download larger-sized videos. With the launch of the LTE-A service nationwide, we are now able to better meet those needs.
About half of all smartphone users have used their devices to download movies, and Kim says that the number is expected to reach about 70% within 4 years. The service is almost 3 times faster than the existing LTE networks and 15 times faster than the 3G services that have been available since 2006. But the speedy broadband LTE-A network won't be limited to smartphones.
The convergence of broadband LTE-A and other related industries, such as wearable devices and the Internet of Things, will gain momentum.
The smart car and smart building sectors, along with the big data industry, are other possible benefactors of the fast speeds that broadband LTE-A have to offer, not to mention its capacity to accommodate large amounts of information at lower costs. And the next upgrade on top of this broadband LTE is expected to be commercialized at the end of this year, and that means it's going to be quite costly for ordinary consumers to keep up with this trend, given that these smartphones don't come cheap. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And here's an update on Typhoon Nagori. Although Korea's southern Jeju Island is now free from the typhoon's influence, Japan has been hit hard, causing at least 3 deaths and widespread damage. Park Ji-won has more.
Typhoon Nagori swept upon the Japanese mainland on Thursday morning. The Japanese Meteorological Agency says the tropical storm center made landfall on Kyushu, southwestern Japan, at around 7 a.m. local time. Although downgraded to a typical typhoon late Wednesday from its earlier super typhoon status, the storm dumped torrential rain on Okinawa, Japan's southernmost prefecture. Nearly 200 millimeters of rain fell on Okinawa in just 3 hours on Wednesday. Nagano Prefecture in central Japan also saw roughly 70 millimeters of rain per hour, the heaviest rain recorded in the region in the month of July.
Torrential rain and flooding are forecast across the south and west due to the typhoon. We advise the public to take the necessary precautions against flooding and torrential rain. Please also be aware of strong gusty winds and high waves.
At least 3 people have been killed due to the typhoon, including a teenage boy during a landslide in central Japan and an 83-year-old man swept into a swollen river in Fukushima. Some regional airports have been closed and train services have been canceled in the hardest hit areas of Kyushu. Officials in Japan say the storm could still bring heavy rain and violent winds to eastern Japan, including Tokyo, by Friday. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
The head coach of Korea's national football team has resigned, taking responsibility for Team Korea's performance at the Brazil World Cup. This comes just a week after the Korea Football Association suggested that he stay until the end of his contract, which runs through until the Asian Cup in January. Hong was criticized for selecting only the players familiar to him for the World Cup, regardless of their form or fitness, and he recently came under fire too for a land purchase while prepping for the World Cup. Korea could only muster a single point, a draw against Russia from their 3-game stay in Brazil. Israeli airstrikes continue to bombard the Gaza Strip as the number of Palestinian deaths soars. With more on this story, of course, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, Israel has now begun the 3rd day of its offensive against Hamas, but it looks like more and more civilians are getting caught in this crossfire.
That's right. At least 21 people were killed by Israeli aerial assaults on Gaza in the early morning hours of Thursday, 5 of which were Palestinian children. It marks the deadliest day since tensions escalated following the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli youths as well as a Palestinian teen this past month. That brings the overall death toll to 72 since Israel launched Operative Protective Edge on Tuesday in an attempt to halt cross-border rocket fire. Israeli officials say the military has hit more than 750 targets inside Gaza over the past 48 hours and is warning that a ground operation could be imminent as more artillery forces and tanks position themselves along the border. The military group Hamas says it fired 8 rockets at Israel on Thursday, 2 of them at Tel Aviv. However, no casualties or injuries were reported. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is scheduled to brief the Security Council on the crisis tonight. The UN chief condemned the rocket attacks against Israel and urged both sides to show restraint, saying the region could not afford another full-blown war.
Well, many of us could agree with that. And now, heading now to Pakistan, the country's top military commander says security forces have seized a key city from the Taliban in the northeast. What's the latest in this counter-terrorism operation?
Well, the Pakistani military is entering its 4th week on its ongoing mission to flush out the Taliban in the region, following a series of terror attacks at an international airport last month. Officials say the army has retaken nearly 80% of the strategic town of Miran Shah, which they say was the control center of communication and logistics for all terrorist groups. The once bustling town is now virtually deserted after citizens were warned after anyone who stayed behind would be considered a militant. Commanders say more than 400 insurgents have been killed during the operation, but some remain skeptical that the campaign can bring about an end to Taliban attacks in Pakistan.
Top leadership of TTP is not in Pakistan, they're sitting in Afghanistan. And we've been raising this point with Afghanistan at all channels, that they need to be targeted, eliminated, or handed over back to Pakistan.
24 soldiers have been killed and 19 injured during the fighting. However, the extent of civilian casualties remains unclear. Pakistan's allies, especially the United States, have urged the government for years to eliminate Taliban strongholds in the northeast of the country.
I see. Now, turning now to the U.S., Paul, where pro-immigration advocates and religious leaders there are holding rallies to support undocumented workers. I mean, Washington has been pushing for immigration reform for years now, and it looks like the latest flashpoint for this debate has turned to the streets of California.
That's right. There was a mass protest at the Murrieta Civic Center in southwestern California on Wednesday as undocumented migrants were from Texas. Among the speakers at the vigil were the parents of 2 children aged 10 and 7 who were detained while attempting to cross the Mexico-Texas border. The family says they were fleeing to the U.S. to escape widespread drug violence in Guatemala. Organizers hope the event raises awareness about the issues that millions of migrant families are facing in America.
We've seen that there's so much hate going on regarding these migrant families without giving it a human cause. I think a lot of these people, they forget that they are humans and they are fleeing a very real danger in their home countries.
The rally comes as President Barack Obama again called on Congress for emergency funding to help cope with the recent wave of child migrants from Central America. Obama said $3.7 billion was urgently needed to deal with what he called a humanitarian crisis.
And finally, Paul, a surge in violence has erupted in Brazil following the national team's biggest defeat at the World Cup in nearly a century. I'm sure it was disbelief over this huge loss at first, which turned into anger now.
Absolutely. The devastating defeat in the semifinal match shattered the dreams of millions who hoped the country would be able to win on home soil, especially after spending over $11 billion to host the tournament. But that disappointment soon turned to anger. Protests, robberies, and vandalism erupted overnight in Brazil's largest city of Sao Paulo. Demonstrators torched dozens of buses in neighborhoods inside and out of the city, while disappointed fans burned a Brazilian flag. Police were on high alert and apprehended perpetrators, though there was no widespread rioting as was feared by some. Authorities have ramped up security for Brazil's next game when they face against the Netherlands on Saturday in the third-place match. However, Korea's foreign ministry has issued an advisory for its citizens currently in Brazil, urging them to avoid large crowds and exercise caution. Chetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update, and we'll see you back here just about 2 hours. Time now to check on weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, it was a hot day, I know. You don't have to update us on that. And so how about other regions?
It was pretty much the same, and the daytime high in Daegu soared to 35.9 degrees, which is a new record high for Korea in the month of July. At the moment, the nation is at the edge of a high-pressure system from China, which is why we are seeing partly cloudy skies, but the clouds weren't enough to keep out the heat, as a heat wave warning has been issued for the central regions and Daegu. Well, Seoul and Daegu soared to 33 and 34, Gwangju and Busan to the low 30s. On to other places. Well, Daejeon and Mount Kumgang hit 32, Jeju and Dokdo make it to the mid-20s. That's your weather for now, but I'll be back with more after 10.
Bo-kyung, thanks so much for that. And that does it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.